Impact. So we have here today Jim Clifford, who is the Director and CEO of Sonnet Advisory Impact, and also Alice Hulbert, who is the Executive. I'm really excited for this session. I know we've been working with them last week to sort of develop this and to kind of really bring it together for the Enactus student group. So I'd like to hand over to Jim and Alice and welcome them here to get started. Thank you very much.
Let me just share my screen with
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire. And Alice is just going to share her screen with the slides. So welcome to the session and thank you for letting Alice and me come along and get involved today, as I've been involved over a number of years with Enactus and never cease to be impressed by the things you all get up to. This afternoon, we're going to tackle two particular topics which are perhaps not so often well tackled by the Enactus teams when they come through, well, either when they're developing their project or when they come through to presenting it for one of the awards, which of course is also quite important and exciting. The first one is about how do we work out what people's real needs are, what the community needs, what the environment needs really are, for which onto which you can focus your project. We're going to tackle that one first, and then secondly, let's unpick some of the impact measurement that you might do and make it really speak to the stories of change that you're delivering. So very broadly speaking, the first one's going to run for about an hour and the second one for a little over half an hour. And there are, as Claire mentioned earlier on, interactive elements for you to get involved with. So needs, how to explore the real ones. Ali, if you turn over to the next slide, please. How to explore the real needs, not the ones you suppose are there, but the real ones, and unpick them fully. We're going to be looking at taking an area of work that interests you, that really matters to you, but then finding out what it's really like, what are the real causes of the real problems. We talk about this as reimagining. Can we see things? Can you see things like Alice did from a new angle and see different things, a new reality, and perhaps the same things, but looking at them differently? Okay, Alice, and over again. So, like Alice did, back a bit.
There we go.
We're going to get there. Excellent. Thanks, Alice. So like Alice did in the storybook, we're going to go reimagining and take you on a reimagining journey. Click, 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 Alice. Now, some of these slides, keep going, Alice, through to number 8 and beyond. Some of these slides you will, I hope, have encountered, that's the right one, you will have encountered on the video that's been circulated in advance. There are 2 videos, one for the needs, one for the impact. Hope you've had a chance to listen to those. And I'm just going to pick out 1 or 2 key thoughts that come out from that set. This is not to give you an excuse not to listen to the whole thing, because I do think there's a lot there that could be helpful to you, but just to really pinpoint some very important things. Now, you've previously heard about design thinking. Is that right, Amy and Claire? Nod? Yes, yes, we have. So we put on here the design thinking stages that you may have had variations of the theme of that in the previous session. So this is about the 4 design stages. And then from the, we talk through on the video recording how design thinking based in this sort of arena, in intervention development, in enterprise development, can follow those design stages. And they follow from understanding what is needed, what people need, the changes they need in their lives, which we call outcomes, through to what can we do about it, through to how can we resource that, and then building your entrepreneurial model around that so that it becomes sustainable and long-lasting. On that, what we want to do today is zero in on that needs and outcomes bit. Now, we're going to keep coming back to this, that we think perhaps as much as a third of your time and energy should be on this end of the design process. We're asking you to ask, to listen, to find out, and then to formulate the right question to be answered. If you don't start here and understand what the people you're trying to help really need from their perspective, none of the rest of the design works. So we're going to be looking at how to listen and understand and do that really well. 2 clicks, Ali. We're going to be setting people, though, the people that you're helping, in a systems context. No person is an island entire of itself, said John Donne. And that's so true. We sit within systems that work around us, family, friends, community, social care, employment, the university, housing, so many systems working around us. And it's the same for the people that you're working to help. They don't sit there in isolation. You need to look at the systems that are sitting around them and that affect them, that affect their situation. So those systems can be human systems, such as ways that people behave towards them. They can be financial, government infrastructure systems like benefits. They can be physical infrastructure systems like housing, communication, transport. And we've given an example of the systems here. I think this is from a map of terminal care done for Marie Curie. So we need to think not only about how do we improve the person and their presenting challenges, but how can we improve the system around them? And that is really about the entrepreneurial and sustainable bits of the Enactus programme. Ali, over to you.
So what do we mean by needs? So when we're talking about needs, we're looking at the people or the situation you're trying to help, and we're trying to understand the key problem there that needs to be addressed. And one of the ways you might do this is by looking at something called the 5 whys approach. And this looks at the cause and effect between different events. And what it means is you can really drill down to find out what that underlying issue is, what the need is. And once you've got to the root of the problem, which is called root cause analysis, you can say, well, so what? What do we do? What can we design that will overcome this problem and really meet that need? So in the 5 whys, let me just get out my laser pointer. You would start with a symptom, which is the issue that you'd like to look at. And you think, well, why is that happening? And you keep asking yourself, why is that happening? Right until you get to the real root of the problem. So if we look at this example here, this is customers in a restaurant and they're very angry. And we say, well, why might they be angry? And they might be angry because the service is slow. And why might the service be slow? Well, because food orders are late. And why are food orders late? Because the chef isn't cooking. And why is the chef not cooking? Because he's busy washing dishes. And why is he busy washing dishes? Because he's run out of plates. So then we know that the root cause is that there's a lack of plates. And so for our so what, we might think, well, the restaurant could buy more plates to overcome that problem. Or they could employ more people to wash plates. And you can see that at the end, once you've understood that root cause, your solution isn't necessarily what you thought your solution might be when you started out that process. And quite often it might be a simpler solution than what you thought at the beginning. Now, the other thing is that when you've found your solution, you'll have intended outcomes for the beneficiaries, your target groups, but you might also have some unintended results. And in this example, it could be that we've bought more plates, but actually we've now got a lot of dirty plates. So we'd need to think about how we could overcome that. And that would be an unintended outcome. We need more people to wash the plates maybe. And if you can consider both your intended outcomes, so the outcomes for your target group, and the unintended outcomes, so how other people are being effective, then what is really good is you can prioritize the outcomes that will matter the most, and you can put strategies in place to mitigate your negative outcomes. So like we're saying, you might employ more people to clean the plates. And overall, this will mean that you can communicate to your investors so that those investors who want to focus on different outcomes, they have that communication with you. They know which outcomes you're hitting.
Okay, so don't forget that one. There's a point that Alice has explained that to you there about the 5 whys, because you're going to be using 5 whys analysis on the exercise in a short while. There's your first clue. I said that people sit in a situation, they have systems around them, they have environmental factors around them that affect them. Here's one way of analysing that and structuring the way you explain it, the way you understand it. So if we think of people's situations as being like an iceberg, only the tip of it, only the presenting behaviours of the client's experience or the individual's experience protrude above the waterline, and we see it. But as we know, most of an iceberg sits below the waterline. I'm sure some of you will be able to tell me the exact percentage. But in a similar way, when looking at the iceberg model for situational analysis, a lot of the problem, a lot of the analysis sits below the waterline. So just coming down the levels, at the top level, we might understand the experience of the individual or their family, and we might palliate, make it better. We might then delve down into what are the events that sat around that situation and caused it. And we might react to those and think how the family reacts to them and deal with them. We might go down further to think what are the underlying patterns of behaviour that make those events happen. And maybe we could anticipate those and head some of them off or change some of the behaviours. Let's go down a layer further. What are the underlying social structures, infrastructures, funding structures within which people sit? Could we redesign those? Could we change the design so that they work better? And then finally, all the structures are built by people who have a particular viewpoint on what's going on. Maybe we could transform those mental models. For an example, people with needs who are looking to claim benefits, simple example, are they people who must find the right form of support? Or are they people who are potentially lead swinging and they need to be, the ones that are misclaiming need to be weeded out? Hugely different impression, and the way you deal with people and the way that system has an effect on them will be different as a result of that mental model. Okay, Ali?
So I'm just going to talk through to you now the process that we follow when we're looking to understand needs on our projects. So going back to the 5 whys, we know that understanding needs is the only way that you're going to be able to build a solution that will actually solve that underlying problem. So this process that I'm about to explain to you, we think should probably take about 1/3 of your project time. So we start with a literature review, and that will be some desktop research. So we'll have a Google and we'll look for themes in the area that we're interested in. We'll gather information and we'll understand what's important in the sector. And we're starting to develop our thoughts so that when we go out and speak to people, we know the kind of questions we might want to be asking. And one of the things we often do at this point is just have a quick conversation with some of the people we know who are working in the sector and ask them for pointers on where to start, because they might say, oh, there's a really big government report that's come out recently that's really important, or they might say these are key players in the sector and it's worth looking at their information. Then at stage 2, we'll be looking to do interviews with people and run workshops. So we'll be building on our information from stage 1. We now know what's important, but we want to talk to people about their experiences. We want to build their stories so that we can understand their needs. And you can do this as a one-to-one interview with somebody, or you might want to run a workshop with a group of people. Running a workshop means that you can really test and challenge ideas with a group of people and see if they agree or disagree. And often we'll use a blend of the two. So we can test out ideas in interviews and then check them in workshops. Now, when you're running an interview, a lot of people say this is the most daunting part. So just some tips and tricks. I think the best thing to do is to volunteer with a project partner so you can get some experience and you can ask to speak with beneficiaries. And then before the interview, I always build a list of questions. I don't have to stick to it completely in the interview, but it at least guides you. And you need to have a similar list of questions so that at the end, you can pull out common themes across the people you've interviewed. And then finally, I record the interview on my phone so that I can later come back and look at it. And if you do that, you just need to remember to get consent. So at stage 3, we're looking to analyse and consider causes. So we want to pause and reflect. We want to see what is happening and why is it happening. And here you might want to bring in some numbers data to test what you found in your interviews. So you could maybe build a questionnaire or something, but just remember that the qualitative data, people's stories, is so important because that's how you're understanding the needs and you know what questions to ask in your questionnaire. Then at stage 4, we're doing the 5 whys approach, which we talked about earlier. So we just want to know there, what is the root cause? And at stage 5 is the situational analysis. So as Jim was talking through the iceberg model, what are the other elements in the problem that you're trying to look at? And then stage 6, we say, so what? Looking back through all of our research, what is the solution that might meet those needs we've identified? And this is where you can co-design. So you can test your solution with different beneficiaries or service providers, and you start to refine your solution. And this is also where you would be thinking about your outcomes, your intended outcomes for your target group, but also your unintended outcomes. Okay, Jim, I'll set you off on the example.
Thanks for that, Alice. And so just recapping very briefly, ask, listen, and then listen some more. That's the key message from this. So we're now going to go into a case study exercise. This is a fictitious case study, but it is typical of the situations that are experienced for children needing adoptive and in some cases foster families. Now, I'm going to introduce this with a little thought picture, word picture about Sally and what she's been through. For those of you who are likely to find that a bit upsetting, this does carry a little bit of a warning. There is no direct abuse in it or anything of that type, but it is very sad, quite upsetting, the situation that she's been through. So for those of you that wish to switch your audio off, you will just see the picture of Sally on the screen. And when I switch over to Alice, taking over, Alice is going to be talking about the adoptive family into which Sally is placed. So if you want to switch your audio off, please do so now. For those of you that are left with me, if you can, just close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're cold, hungry, lying in wet clothes, lying on a floor, uncomfortable, in pain, and you're not able to move or do anything to improve your situation. You are alone. Or if others are there, they ignore you. They don't hear your cries. People walk past you. They knock into you. There's a cacophony of noise that is loud and chaotic, and you can't understand any of what is said. There are loud bangs that make you jump. You are afraid, angry, frustrated, panic-stricken. You can't do anything to help yourself, and no one is listening. Your situation is desperate, life-threatening. Open your eyes. How uncomfortable did that make you feel? I imagine pretty uncomfortable overall. Now think of a baby in that situation. Cold, wet, hungry, in pain, scared, unable to change anything, to improve anything, not just for minutes, but hour upon hour, day after day, for years. Maybe sometimes an adult does approach, but they're unpredictable. 1 minute there's hope, the next fear as the adult changes from calm and nurturing to screaming out of control and threatening. This is the reality, the story we hear for many, many children who were eventually removed from birth families and put into foster care and ultimately to adoptive care. Foster carers and adoptive parents provide good care for their physical needs. They're fed, kept clean, played with and kept safe. In an adoptive family and some foster families, they may get therapeutic support as well. Yet for the child, it all feels strange. The kindness to a child who can't trust is incongruous and scary. It may be a moment of apparent safety before an even greater onslaught. The clean, warm bed is unfamiliar. The sheets feel as though they burn. The touch is so strange. So much so, you prefer to sleep on the floor, which is familiar. Choices are too much, even about simple things. Wanting a drink means approaching an adult, which is terrifying. Ali.
So now we've met Sally, and we're going to find out a little bit more about what happens to her next. We're going to do this as a worked example. We're going to use the 5 whys that we were talking about earlier to understand the underlying problem or the root cause in this case study. So I'll read out the case study to you. As I'm reading, I'd like you to have a think through as to what you think the underlying problem or the root cause might be here. And at the end, I'll ask you just to pop in the chat what you think it might be, and then we will move into worked examples. So Bill and Nancy adopted Sally when she was 5. They already had a birth child called Tom, who was 2 years older than Sally, and Sally is now 10. Bill is a stay-at-home dad, and when Nancy is out at work, Sally gives Bill a lot of trouble, but she's lovely when Nancy is at home. Bill is nearing burnout. He tries to explain Sally's behaviour to Nancy, but she doesn't understand. She starts to blame Bill, and Bill and Nancy start to argue. Bill has learned about childhood trauma and therapeutic parenting, but because of Sally's past experiences, it's taking him so long to get her dressed and to feed her that he only has time to cover these basic things. Bill and Nancy decide to ask for help, but they've been told that there's no help available for someone of Sally's age. Bill is so upset by his constant battles with Sally that he cuts off from her emotionally. He can physically care for her, but he is unable to emotionally care for her. Bill and Nancy are worried about Tom. While Sally hasn't hurt him, her violence towards Bill upsets him and frightens him. Sally grows more and more distant from Bill and Nancy. She won't cooperate with them and is very rejecting and aggressive. Every attempt made by Bill and Nancy to reach out to her emotionally is pushed back. Bill and Nancy feel drained and that they can't love Sally. So just quickly, what do you think might be, what's your gut thought that the root cause or the underlying problem might be? Yes, Jane.
Hi. For me, I feel like no one's actually asked Sally any questions. So they're just making assumptions. Well, from reading this anyway, they're just making assumptions and trying to solve it between them, rather than asking Sally what she needs and what she wants, and what it is that she needs from them in order for her to, I guess, cooperate and feel safe within the family.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. And then we've got in the chat, we've got Sally's past experiences and a lack of communication. And one of the things that, this is a real life case study, and Jim and I were having these similar thoughts at this point in time. And then I'll be interested to see where you end up when you go and explore the 5 whys. So let me explain what we'd like you to do. So if we take Sally and we look at the 5 whys, so we're taking the symptom, which is that Sally won't cooperate with Bill and Nancy. She's rejecting and she's aggressive. And whenever they try to emotionally connect with her, Sally is pushing them back. And so Bill and Nancy feel drained and that they cannot love Sally. And what I'd like you to do is we will have 15 minutes in breakout groups to go away and ask, why might that be happening? And then, as we did with the plates, why might that be happening again? So that we can get to the root cause and maybe a possible solution. And things we think that you might want to think about, just to start you off, would be, do Bill and Nancy know what to do as parents? Is Sally nasty? Is there anyone who can help? And what do Bill or Nancy or Sally need? So when you come back from your breakout groups, we'll be asking you what you think the root cause is and how you think you might be able to solve the problem. Claire, are you happy to move everybody into breakout groups?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the introduction to the activity, Alice. Just while Alice has been talking there, I have been moving you all into breakout rooms of about 7 students, each with a member of either Enactus UK or a member of Sonnet in the room with them. Before we go into breakout rooms, it's really, really important that you click the link that I've just put into the chat for you. So this will take you to a slide deck on our Google Drive, our Enactus UK Google Drive, that you can interact with. Okay, so in a couple of moments, Anonymous Hippo, Elephant are all going to start appearing in that Google Doc. Now on there you will find recaps of these slides, but you'll also find some post-it notes and a couple of different pages. So with your group, find yourself one of those pages and start kind of putting your ideas, just like if you were in the room, on those post-it notes, and feel free to move them around. Okay, you should be able to interact with it, write your ideas down, move them around. But if your group finds one page, put your ideas there, and then we have a really great record of it. Hello everyone, as you just start to filter back in, I hope you had some great discussions. I think all the groups will be here in about 3 or 4 seconds actually, and then we can have a look. I have been having a spy on your kind of idea boards as you've been going through, and goodness me, are you full of lots of really great ideas about why and what that root cause could be. And it's really, really fantastic to see. I think a couple of people just finishing off their last thoughts. So, Alice, would you like me to screen share then, and we can have a bit of a review?
Yeah, and then we'll flick through and just get some of the common ideas that you're all coming up with. So actually, this was my group and they were wonderful. They were saying everything that I wanted them to say. So we had, I think, common themes that we had coming out for the root cause were that there's a breaking communication between the children and the parent, that Bill and Nancy might need some additional support, and that they might need professional help or therapy. And then there was this theme of Nancy not having enough time to care for Sally, and that because of Sally's challenging behaviour, there was their parents have become alienated from other friends and family, so they lacked support. And in terms of possible solutions, we were talking about finding a balance between getting professional help and also being able to look after Sally and not making her feel different, and that we would need a better support network around Bill and Nancy. And then we had this idea of freeing up time for the parents and being able to bring in other people who could do some other household chores, so they had time to emotionally connect with Nancy. Claire, are you happy to go on to the next group?
Yeah, of course. So this is group number 1 with Maisie.
Yeah, so we've got Sally wants more attention, and that Sally's previous negative experiences might impact on how she is now. And then in terms of possible solutions, we're saying again, create more one-on-one time with Sally and her parents. So there's this theme of time, and this idea of positive reinforcement and strong communication between the parent and child. Okay, I'm going to whip through so we've got time to go through everyone's, if that's all right.
Okay.
So we have, again, this theme of time needs to be spent on looking after Sally's basic needs rather than being able to just look after her well-being. And there's no other people around who they can reach out to for support. And then there's a solution is that Bill and Nancy might need to be getting some professional advice. We'll go to the next group.
Okay.
So we've got understanding Sally's past, so whether she's got childhood trauma, whether or not that's making it difficult for her to engage with Bill. We've got this idea of favoritism towards the birth child, and we had this discussion in my group, and that was we thought that was a real need, but a tricky one to find a solution for. And that it's hard for the parents to relate to Sally's trauma, so they can't give her that emotional support she needs. The solution, again, this time idea, is that Nancy could take some time off to help look after Sally, and that nobody is listening to each other. And I think that's a really interesting one, that nobody is feeling supported in this situation. If we go on to the next group, Claire.
Okay.
So these ones, oh, this is perfect. These are very similar to the other ones we've been looking at. So lack of a support network for Sally, and maybe she would need professional advice. And the possible solution is creating a support network in that same situation. If we move on to the next one, Claire. So then we've got, there's a no support for children that age by exterior organisations. So actually Bill and Nancy haven't got anywhere they can turn to. The parents might be trying to connect in the wrong way, so they're not understanding Sally right. But a possible solution we've got is that Sally would be able to spend time with both her parents on her own and helping to bring in other members of the family to provide that support. Is that all the groups, Claire? Have we got another one?
No, that is all the groups. Yeah.
Perfect. So there's really, I'll pop up the answers on screen, but there's very similar ideas coming out, which shows that even if you're starting from different places, you will, using the 5 whys, you will get to a very similar understanding of need. So if I pop up my screen. So the answers that we had, like I said, this is a real life situation. So Jim and I were working on looking at adoption breakdown and why that happens. And we've got really similar to the answers you guys had coming out. So we've got Bill and Nancy aren't able to work with Sally on an emotional level. maybe they don't know how, maybe they don't have time. They can't reach out to services for support, and a few of you were saying that maybe going to external services would be a good idea. But one of the things we were finding in interviews with adoptive parents was actually, as soon as they start to do that, because the child is displaying such challenging behaviour, that becomes a child protection issue. So instead, Bill and Nancy are choosing to hide this problem at home. Bill and Nancy feel lonely and inadequate. Nancy isn't supporting Bill, and the couple are arguing, and Bill and Nancy are close to burnout. And their family and friends don't understand Bill and Nancy. They're criticising them and their different child, and they live far away maybe, and they can't therefore offer practical support. And this is something I think all of you were coming out with, this idea that Bill and Nancy don't have support. Bill and Nancy need to juggle the needs of both of their children. And then a common theme that everybody was saying was that it takes so long to do the basics with Sally that they don't have time to be connecting with her emotionally. Sally needs some help to work through her past trauma. And again, this idea of support. Sally is so difficult to cope with that Bill and Nancy no longer have a support network. This is the 5 whys in practice. And where this brings us to is the root cause. So the root cause, and you were all coming up with this, is that Bill and Nancy don't have time or space to emotionally connect with Sally, and they don't have the support either. So they need family and friends who can understand Sally. And so what? So what solution can we build to meet this root cause? And it's actually much simpler than we thought to start with. So practical help around the house will give Bill and Nancy the time and space they need to bond with Sally. So that could be as simple as volunteers coming in to do the cleaning and the ironing, which would give Bill and Nancy time to take Sally swimming or something. And the other thing that we could look to build in is support and friendship for Bill and Nancy. And that would be from adults who've been through similar experiences to them, and who can support them without blaming them. So actually the solution is much simpler maybe than we thought to start with, because to start with we were saying maybe Sally would need professional help, or maybe the parents need more training, but it's actually much less costly, this solution. It's just being able to get some volunteers to go in and take that time that Bill and Nancy would be spending doing other things, or being able to connect Bill and Nancy in with other adoptive parents. So the solution you'd be designing would be that connection of volunteers into adoptive families. And actually, one of the things we also found when we did this in practice was often the volunteer might be an elderly person who'd say, I'll come in and do the ironing for you. And actually, when you dug deeper, they didn't have a support network either. So when we were looking at those intended outcomes and unintended outcomes, we'd have an unintended positive outcome because they would then have a support network themselves. So I hope we've given you a few ideas to ponder on. And we're going to now move on to looking at impact measurement and impact metrics.
Okay. I've just put up in the chat, for those that found that topic at all interesting, there were a number of people who were commenting that it was quite thought-provoking. There is a documentary which is still available on Daily Motion. It was a BBC Two documentary from 2011 called A Home for Maisie, spelt like the group leader of Group 1, M-A-I-S-I-E, if you're interested in having a further look at how difficult to place these sort of children are. So, a bit about impact measurement. Hope we've still got everyone with us. Well done for that exercise. We will be picking up on some of the thoughts from that in the solution that we're looking at the end of this section, the worked example. So we're looking here at how do we find realistic indicators or metrics that will both measure the effect we're having, but also inform the reader as to the effect that we're having. And I have to say this came from looking at a number of Enactus.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Jim. I'm not sure we're seeing your screen, how you mean show it to us. Should we all be on full screen at the moment?
Let me.
Ali,
yeah.
How are you presenting?
I think you might just want to stop your screen share and just
Let me
restart
pause
it.
share.
Yeah.
Really?
That, Ali?
Are you now getting? No.
So you need to restart your slideshow, I think.
Interesting, because I've got it on. Here we go.
Close it down and restart it, and then we'll see how we get.
There we go. We got it.
That's it. There we are.
Does that work?
Perfect.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
perfect. Sorry
Excellent.
about the interruption just there.
Okay,
No, thank you.
Thanks for rescuing Claire. Okay, over on to the next slide. Having got that one, we'll skip over it.
We'll move on.
What we're talking about here is finding realistic indicators or metrics that both measure but also inform in the sense of conveying the meaning as to what we're delivering here. And we were keen to put this section in this time because the presentations in the Enactus finals over the last couple of years honestly have been utterly brilliant enterprises, but they haven't really got to grips with this impact measurement bit all that well, and the other topic was on the needs. So we just wanted to pick up this and just emphasize it a bit more. So there's more detail on the slideshow and video that you've got available. We're just highlighting one or two points from it. One of them is that in what are effectively the European Commission impact measurement standards, it gives a list of 8 factors that constitute good measurement. They actually go in pairs, so it's relevant and helpful, simple and natural, certain, understood and accepted, transparent and founded on evidence. So you can have a look at those later on. They're really good steer towards what can be a really good form of measurement for a social intervention. On to the next one, Ali. Just highlighting one or two points here that come up in the slideshow and video. Now, if this is a picture of a horseshoe-shaped mountain and valley in the middle, actually up in the English Lake District. But within those valleys, you have a river flowing with tributaries coming down off the hillsides. Now that creates a map, if you see it on a map. It's actually a little bit like the map of the outcomes that happen. First this happens, then that happens because of that, and so on. And you get this threading out of the picture and the map of the story of change that is going on for an individual. So in the river valley, there's the river. In the impact measurement, there's the story of change going on. Now, in that river valley, we can stand up on the top of this ridge as we're doing in the photograph. And as we walk around it, we can see lots of different views of that river valley. It's the same river. It flows in exactly the same places, but it looks different every 100 yards or so that you move on. And you can look down in detail at a particular bit or up at the whole vista. And it looks hugely different, but it's still the same. Same with impact measurement. We need to find the story, describe the story in detail, and then we walk around it and decide from what angle we're going to look at it to understand and impress our stakeholders. So listen to the bit on the video about that. It's quite important. Okay, Ali, and on. Okay, and again, one more. Fine. Okay, on these stories, now, how do we describe them in what's known as a theory of change? Theory of change, just heavy-going words for how we're achieving what we're achieving. we identify, I'm looking at the bottom line here, we identify who we're helping, the cohort, who we're helping, what are their needs. Now what we're going to do is match needs to outcomes across at the right-hand end. But to get there, we're going to identify the needs, decide what things we need to do, the activities we need to do to make those needs be met. Then we want to unpick the approaches. What are the characteristics in how we deliver that? It's not just, in the case of Sally, let's build them a friendship network. It's got to be an informed one. It's got to be one that will cope with Sally's behaviours. So there's a lot more to it than just, oh, we'll do that. And then what we do has a point of interface with the people we're helping. That's the output, point at which it engages with them. Volunteers come and help them, might be the answer there. That then has an effect on them. It gets a response from Nancy and Bill. And those are the mechanisms of change. And so we get outcomes happening. For outcome, read change. A life is changed. Primary outcomes happen relatively short term and in the lives of the people that you're touching, you're working with. Secondary outcome is the and so. I built up a support network, and so I was able to get a break and a night out with my wife. Might be what Bill was saying. And the impacts is the extent to which that was down to what you did. Okay, quick run through, more on the video. Ali, storytelling.
Yeah. So,
we've heard this before, haven't we?
Yeah, this is the most important thing. This is where we're looking at real people's lives. We're looking at their stories, what really happens to them, what are their experiences, and then how can we impact on their stories and make them better stories. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do another worked example, and Jim is going to talk us through a theory of change for a charity that works to link volunteers with families and children. So maybe they'll be helping adoptive families like Sally's. It's a very similar kind of solution to the solutions we were talking about earlier. So Jim will go through the service and he will look at the outcomes that the service is going to deliver. And once we've done that, we're going to ask you in groups to think about metrics that we can use to measure the outputs and to measure the outcomes. So when we're measuring the outputs, we're looking at the points of engagement with the service. So these are called output metrics. And when we're measuring outcomes, we're looking to measure the change which is happening. So an outcome metrics. And when you're thinking about your metrics, in the worked example, we want you to have a think about the characteristics of good measurement. And that is, what is it actually practical for people to do or to measure? And what evidence can you actually get hold of? So it's not too difficult for people to measure these outcomes. So Jim, if you're happy to talk us through the theory of change, and then we can break into groups for 15 minutes.
Okay. Certainly. And as I go into this, I will mention yet again that phrase that was on that last slide, because it's so important. Storytelling. We listened originally to people's needs and the stories of what they needed and the story of what change could help them. We're now looking again at the story of change happening. And that's essentially what a theory of change is. So a few key features. You will notice, if you're really, really on top of this, that we don't have an outputs column in the middle of this. That's solely because we've abbreviated the table to make it fit on the page and be visible. Normally, we would have an outputs column. That's the points at which somebody engages with the support. So the volunteer comes and helps the family. And we'd have that between approaches and mechanisms. So we'd go, what do you need? What are we doing? How are we doing it? Outputs, we interface with you. Response from you, so the change you achieve immediately, and then the and so a further change arises. That's how the flow works. So outputs are not shown here. First of all, let's look horizontally. Can you see in the needs column, there's a dark blue, a medium blue and a green colour blob. Those are 3 areas of need. So looking at the families that are being helped by this intervention, they need safety and security. They need to be back in control of things, and to some extent they need to be skilled up. It's not just adoptive families here that are being supported, it's a wider range. And finally, they need the relationships and the communities of support around them. These are families that for a number of reasons are very isolated and don't have support networks. We then go, I think, yes, if you can just notice the link between the needs and the primary outcomes. You just have a look at that dark blue needs blob: protection from violence, safe living environment, crisis support, immediate mental health support and things needed. Have a look at the outcomes, which are, for outcome, read change, reduce risk of harm at home, reduced acute distress, better able to engage with crisis support. It's really responding to those needs. And you'll see the blue line and the green line do the same thing. Then on the activities, these dots are simply a way of explaining which of the needs areas are helped by that activity. So the volunteer support, that's the 3rd blob down as an example, that helps primarily with the medium blue blob: confidence, parenting skills, positive role models, healing from trauma, hope. It also helps with the green one, having trusted friends and feeling more positive. It also helps with the dark blue one, broadly in that order. So that's what that means. Just nipping across to the primary outcomes column, let me just highlight 1 or 2 for you, and this may help on the next exercise. Better able to engage with crisis support in the dark blue blob at the top. So these people are getting in a steadier position. They know where the support is. They can engage with it. They can get hold of it. Then in the medium blue one, improved parenting skills, improved well-being. They're feeling better relationally, in mental health, physically often. And then in the green one at the bottom, I'll just highlight stronger social network. They've got a stronger social network. So there's 1 or 2 clues in that lot as to the ones that you might fancy focusing on in the exercise. So better able to engage with crisis support, improved parenting, improved well-being, and the stronger social network. Ali, all yours.
Perfect. So we're going to break out now into groups for 15 minutes to have a look, have a think through some outcome metrics and some output metrics. And when you come back, we're going to ask you to pop in the chat your top outcome metric, the one you think that would be the most important to measure. Claire, are you happy to break us out into our breakout groups?
Yes, absolutely. Just like before, I've popped a link into the chat for you. This is not an editable, and this is just one for viewing. So when you go into the breakout room, you don't lose access to this really useful information that you've got in front of you. I think it would be really nice as well if on this round, if you perhaps had a spokesperson from your team that maybe shared back that key idea. So if you would like to also nominate someone in your 15 minutes, I think that would be really, really useful.
So if we're happy to start with group 1, you can pop it in the chat, although I can't see the chat at the moment. So Jim, if you might read out the chat, would be lovely.
Maisie will probably speak it, will you, Maisie?
Yeah, I think Kaylee's going to speak, if that's okay, on behalf of Group 1. Kaylee, if you're all right to step up and come off mute, if that's possible.
Yeah, sorry, you froze for a second for me there. We looked at the dark green outcome, where we were looking at better able to give and receive love and kind of the stronger social network side of it. And we focused on the volunteers that we'd considered as a solution for kind of giving more time to Sally with the parents and things. So we kind of looked at both the output and the outcome metrics, and we said that looking at the amount of hours that the volunteers have provided, we could kind of measure that on a quantitative scale. We could just kind of have it quite a closed question where we're talking about how closed questions would maybe be more affiliated to quantitative data. And we also talked about the well-being of the volunteers and the family, and how that could kind of be the outcome metric. And you could look at that more with a scale, maybe to see how they started off, like say 1 to 5, 1 to 10, or maybe even strongly agree, neither, it's kind of those kind of things. But we didn't really have a top between the output and the outcome.
No, but they sound really good metrics.
That's how we looked at it. So.
Thank you. And who's the spokesperson for Group 2?
Just very conscious of time, everybody. And obviously we've all been here and we're troopers this afternoon. So let's share our outcomes, but let's keep those just ever so very brief, just to make sure that we finish as close to past as possible.
Yeah, so I'll be speaking for Group 2, and what we discussed as one of the major impacts is that you could increase your own self-worth and happiness while trying to help someone else. So you might start when you're new to the situation with, say, 1 or 2 on the scale of happiness or self-worth, being on the lower side. And by the time you're done, you not only help someone else out, make their life better, but also are happy and have an increased self-worth yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And that's very similar to what Kaylee's saying of having a sliding scale, which you can measure before and after. Thank you. Sure. And Group 3?
Hello. So we were saying that the key output metric was like increased school attendance and sort of like engagement and things that they were doing in school. And then the outcome metric was the attainment in school. So, yeah.
Perfect. We'll see some of these pop up on my answer slide in a bit. So Group 4?
Yeah, our output metrics will definitely stay with the volunteers in terms of it will help them, they'll be more interested in if it has positive impact, they'll be more interested in working longer hours, longer durations as well. So they'll be with the team for quite a longer time. And in terms of the outcome, it's definitely to do with the family has more time with each other, they can connect better. And in terms of Sally's case, then genuinely, she would be more open to getting help, more open to communication, which means, better in terms of feeling included in community, in terms of skill, maybe doing better, and just general, just giving it.
Yeah, thank you. And this is something we're talking about in my group, is how you could measure that output metric of volunteers. And we were saying you could look at the number of hours that volunteers are working with families as your measurement for that output. Group 5, this is my group.
Yeah, so as Alice just said, we looked at a lot of things that you can measure on a scale of 1 to 10, with that being the volunteer. So ask them at the beginning, like after they've worked with, like right at the beginning, or after they've worked with people for a week, to say, oh, how's your well-being? Let's go for this. And then after a month, and then etc. etc. Also improved attendance and attainment for the child, just to make sure that because behaviour is obviously a big part of that. And also on a scale, how, like, if take the Bill and Nancy and Sally example, asking Bill and Nancy, how do you feel like the emotional connection has grown from 0 to 10? And then also asking Sally separately to make sure that the benefits of like the therapy and all that kind of thing are being mutually felt. So, yeah, that's kind of what we said.
Thank you, Victoria. And then Group 6.
Hi, okay, so we looked at the issue of Nancy and Bill not feeling connected or having a support network. And we suggest, the what you could do is send them to social events and allow them to network. And the way you could measure that is then after doing, getting them to go to all these different events, you could ask them, can you name 4 people you can turn to in a crisis? So that would be kind of like your primary outcome metric. And we felt that was both simple and natural. So it satisfied those 2 measurement requirements. And then the secondary outcome metric would be, did you actually turn to them when you were in a crisis? Were you able to use your support network? So yeah, that was
perfect. Yeah, and we were talking about this in our group, that you can build a map of the people in your support network, and that's a good way, like you were saying, Courtney, of evidencing that somebody has got an increased support network after an intervention. Yeah. And then group 7, we've got 8 groups, haven't we, I think?
No, I think we do have
6 groups.
6 groups.
Perfect.
There you go.
Well, shall I pop up my answers really quickly?
Go for it, Ali.
Through them. I think you will see a lot of things that you've said. So, in fact, a lot of them are very similar. So you've done really well. So we've got the number, in terms of output metrics, we've got the number and value of volunteer hours, which I think a few of you mentioned. We've got looking at the increased engagement with other services, and we might do that in terms of measuring the number of hours we spend with other services. Another metric we could look at for the outputs is actually how many people are we reaching and how long do we keep that engagement with them. And then we could look at, a few of you had this one, the number of days that children would attend school, so we can say that truancy has been reduced. And in terms of outcome metrics, so in looking at that improvement in child's outcomes, we could say that we could look at the number of children on the child protection register, and we think that that would be reduced. We've got this idea of the families considering their support network has improved, and we could map the support network. And then we've got this idea that families feel understood or their well-being has improved. And a lot of you were saying this, that you could have a sliding scale where you measure people when they come into the service, and then you measure them when they come out, and you can measure them then against this benchmark. And you can see that they've improved, their feeling of their well-being has improved. You can do, we talked about this quickly in my group, you can do something called a strengths mapping on an outcome star. And I think it's best if you Google this, but basically it's very similar to this benchmark mapping that we were talking about before. You can draw against different values a line which says where you're at when you start, and then you can draw against different values another line which shows where you're at later. And the idea is your line has, your web, if you like, has grown. So have a look at an outcome star. Then we can build a social network map. Again, a few of you were talking about this. We can develop a specific benchmarking system for this service. So that would pick up on all these other ways we're saying we'd use a scale of 0 to 5 to measure well-being, that kind of thing. We can look at educational attainment and say, well, children are getting better grades at school. That means we've improved their education and their prospects for future life. And we can look at how parents feel more empowered to parent effectively. And again, we might use evidence for that, might be a benchmark scale. So as you can see, a lot of those are things that you've all been saying in your groups. That's fantastic. And that brings us to the end of our trainings. Go on, Jim.
So I was just going to say 2 key messages that you really, really, really must take away from this. First of all, on the needs, don't imagine it, reimagine it, but with the benefit of asking and listening. Go get people to tell their stories and get really inside it, and then learn from the stories. Stories are good evidence from a research perspective. And secondly, when you're measuring, build the stories and understand them, identify the metrics from that, the changes that are happening and the outputs, the points of engagement with the service. That's our key message for the day. Ask and listen, build the stories. Thank you very much. Back to the Enactus team.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you both so much for your time this afternoon. It has been such an insightful session. And do you know what? It's really nice to get into groups and to get the students engaging with each other. I think some of the key messages that I took away from that is the importance of understanding the root cause and not being solution focused, which I think circles back really nicely with what Andrew was saying in our first session of really, you know, we are programmed to be solution focused when really we need to be problem focused to make sure we know what we're looking for. And I'm definitely pinching ask, listen, and then listen some more. Just the importance of getting out there and asking real people about their experiences. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I'm sure the students would extend their thanks as well for the invaluable experiences, and it's just great to have that kind of worked example and to be able to see what that looks like in a particular context.
And Claire, Ali will kick me if I don't say it, but we are very happy to take questions from people after the event. Drop us an email or go via the Enactus team and ask questions if you'd like help. And we're hoping post-lockdown to come back and maybe run a longer session on this in a bit more detail for those that are puzzling about it.
Fantastic. We'll definitely collate any questions that we receive and share them on to you. So thank you very much.